The Happy Prince. Oscar Wilde. About the author. Oscar Wilde was born in Dublin, Ireland and educated at Trinity College, Dublin and Oxford. His mother, Jane Wilde, was a poet who wrote under the name Speranza, or Hope, and his father, Sir William Wilde, was an ear surgeon. Wilde was baptized in a local Anglican church and remained dedicated to the Christian faith throughout his lifetime, in spite of the eccentricities of other aspects of his lifestyle. He was known for his dedication to the aesthetic movement, having published papers on aesthetic morality as early as 1874. He lauded decadence and the value of art for its own sake, a theme that recurred in his plays and fiction. However, Wilde also identified as a socialist, and published an essay called "The Soul of Man Under Socialism," outlining his beliefs. Wilde married Constance Lloyd in 1884, whose annual allowance helped fund his luxurious style of living. The couple had 2 sons together, but their relationship was rocked by Wilde beginning to undertake homosexual relationships with other men, beginning with the journalist and art critic Robert Ross. Allusions, both subtle and explicit, to homosexuality began to recur in Wilde's works. Whole sections of The Picture of Dorian Gray were censored prior to publication, due to their scandalous content. Page 2. And reviewers still described the finished book as excessively decadent and even unclean. Ultimately, Wilde was put on trial in 1895 for gross indecency. After his conviction, he served 2 years in prison before moving into exile in France, where he ultimately passed away at the age of 46. Introduction. This story is about a prince. When the prince was alive, he was very happy. After his death, a big statue of his was erected on a pedestal. From there, the statue of Prince could see the entire city, and at that time he saw the miseries of the people. He saw the poor people, the homeless, their hunger and starvation. The prince was sad to see all these miseries, sadness of the people. The statue of the prince has its jewels delivered to the poor via the swallow. Now, on top of the hill, the prince can see the poverty that had previously been shielded from him. Eventually the statue loses all its material wealth. He is richer inside for helping the needy, but no longer outside, and the swallow dies. The people remove the prince statue, now that he is plain, and discuss the next statue that will replace him, because material wealth is most important to them. Summary. Once, when the prince was alive, he was filled with richness and opulence to the point that, after his death, he was made into a statue of gold leaf and jewels. The gilded statue of the Happy Prince stands on a pedestal overlooking a town. Covered in gold leaf with sapphires for eyes and a ruby on his sword hilt, the statue receives admiration from all passers-by, including town councilors who want to foster a reputation for artistic tastes. A swallow flies over the city on his way to Egypt. He had been delayed after falling in love with a reed, attracted to her slender waist and gracefulness. When she wouldn't accompany his travels, the swallow left alone, but ended up stopping under the statue of the Happy Prince to rest. Surprised at what he takes to be rainfall on a clear night, the swallow realizes that the Happy Prince has been crying. They introduce themselves, and the Happy Prince describes his childhood in a gated palace, when he lived in Sanssouci and played in a walled garden, a time full of superficial pleasures when he was ignorant of the suffering in his city. The swallow is surprised to learn that the statue is not made of solid gold, but he agrees to help the Happy Prince after he describes his pity for a seamstress sewing passion flowers on the satin gown of a. Page 3. Lady in Waiting. She lives in the poor house and cannot care for her sick son, so the swallow agrees to deliver the ruby from the prince's sword hilt to her. On the way to deliver the ruby, the swallow sees old Jews bargaining with each other. He delivers the ruby and stays in order to cool the feverish boy by flapping his wings. After delivering the ruby, the swallow returns and describes feeling quite warm, in spite of the cold, due to his good deed. He still intends to go to Egypt and describes to the happy prince what marvels await him there, from the river horses to the god Memnon on his great granite throne. Nevertheless, the prince begs him to stay and help a young playwright freezing in his garret. The man needs to finish a play for the theater director but has become too cold. In the end, the swallow agrees to stay another night and plucks out one of the prince's sapphire eyes to deliver to the young man. The swallow returns once more to bid farewell to the happy prince, who pleads with him to deliver his other sapphire eye to a little match girl who has dropped her matches. Without any help, the child's father will beat her. The swallow agrees and promises also to remain in the town by the prince's side forever, as he cannot bear to leave him alone and blind on his pedestal. The swallow sits on the prince's shoulder and recounts tales of Egypt and faraway lands. He tells of the red ibises on the Nile, the Sphinx, who is as old as the world itself, and a great green snake who has 20 priests to feed it with honey cakes. Though the prince calls these stories marvelous, he asks for tales of the suffering townspeople instead, as there is no mystery as great as misery. The swallow flies over the city and reports of the rich making merry while beggars starve at their gates, including young boys trying to warm themselves under a bridge while a passing watchman tries to clear them out. Upon hearing these tales, the prince wishes to distribute the fine gold leaf gilding him, to alleviate some of this misery. The swallow agrees to help him and he delivers sheets of gold leaf to the children. The prince grows dull and gray, while the children's faces grew rosier and they laughed and played games in the street. Winter finally arrives, and the swallow grows far too cold. Knowing that only limited time remains to him, he asks to kiss the prince's hand. Instead, the prince says, "You must kiss me on the lips, for I love you." The swallow does so and falls down dead at his feet, at which point the prince's leaden heart snaps right in two. The next morning, the mayor spots the gray statue with the dead swallow at its feet and complains of its shabbiness. The town councilors agree, calling the statue little better than a beggar, and they decide to have the happy. Page 4. Prince melted down and recast into a new statue. Though they fight as to whom he should represent, the mayor wishes a statue of himself, but each of the town councilors think it should be of them instead. The art professor at the university goes so far as to say, as he is no longer beautiful, he is no longer useful. The overseer of the workmen at the foundry melts down the statue but notes with shock that the broken lead heart refuses to melt. Giving up, he tosses the heart aside on a dust heap along with the body of the swallow. Soon after, God asks one of his angels to bring the two most precious things in the city. The angel brings the leaden heart and the dead bird, and God agrees that he had rightly chosen. The happy prince and the swallow would be rewarded eternally in paradise for their compassion and sacrifice.